wish to speak, use the hand raise function, and please only use chat for immaterial items. Anything material to the discussion on chat, please don't use it, because we have to be transparent. Okay, I hope that's clear. So we'll move on to the minutes of the meeting of the 4th of September, which was chaired by Sarah. Were those an accurate record of the meeting as far as everyone is concerned? Everyone happy? In that case, yes. I will ask. Thank you. I will ask Sarah, in that case, in due course, to sign those minutes as a true and accurate record. Next, are there any declarations of interest for any of the matters under discussion today? No? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
yes, sorry, Sarah, yep.
Chris.
Yep.
So I think just, obviously, we're touching on the budget. Obviously, yep. As Deputy Chair, I received remuneration for that.
Oh, yes, quite right. You're quite right. Thank you for reminding me, as I do too, in that case.
And also, I am currently working with Turner Contemporary on England's Creative Coast, which is a sector support funded bid. So just to declare that. I mean, we aren't making any decisions on that, I don't believe, but I just thought.
Thank you. No, quite right. Thank you, Sarah. So if those two interests could be registered, thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay, great. The other thing I should just remind everyone, as I always do at this time, to make sure that your register of interests is up to date. I've certainly had to include an additional item for myself since the last board in relation to the Commonwealth Sport Foundation, so that's hopefully been that's been in my register. But just everyone, just make sure that you keep them up to date. In that case, I'll hand over to Adam to talk about the annual performance review. Adam.
Thanks, Chris. Just a couple of words really from me on this, just to let board members know that last week we undertook a mid-year review with the Cities and Local Growth Unit, and this just gave us an opportunity to reflect on, I guess, the normal categories that we would reflect on. So where we are with governance, where we are with delivery, specifically around the growth deal, and you know, early progress on getting building fund, and then around strategy and what we're doing there as well. It was, all the sessions with LEPs were very deliberately planned to be fairly low key, because I think there's a good recognition from the Cities and Local Growth Unit that, you know, we've got a lot to do. So they're very kind in keeping it fairly light, but we had a very good session. We, Suzanne, Rhiannon and I went through those categories quite thoroughly with the official, and generally speaking, you know, really positive. I think the conclusions we came to at the end were all very good. Really just wanted to let the board members know that, because I think it's a good sign that we're headed in the right direction. So when we get to the more formal annual performance review in January time, I think we should be well positioned. But I just wanted to let board members know that we've undergone that process, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. And one of the things that Adam, Sarah and I have been talking about is whether we do just a brief governance, what I would call a governance health check, since the company has now been in operation for 6 months, and I think it is probably the time where you just check to make sure that everything is operated as we had anticipated it would do. I'll say a little bit more about that probably under any other business, but I think if we're going to do that, we should do that either now or maybe in 6 months' time. I'm just reflecting on that, but perhaps we can seek some views under AOB at the end. Okay, in that case, let's move on to the meat of the business, which is various items that we have, business items we have to discuss today. And the first one is the COVID-19 Recovery Fund SME business support. Adam.
Thanks, Chris. I won't say very much on this before I hand over to Joe to go through some of the detail in the paper. Just to remind board members that, you know, it was fantastic that the board recently took the decision to sort of move some funds a little bit and focus some of them on COVID recovery activities. I think it's very important that CELEP is seen to be active in this space, and that we can you know, target some of our funding in towards SMEs in a way that we haven't before, because it's simply just not the way that our funding has been designed. So great that we've made that leap. I think we had a really good discussion at the last board meeting about how we how we work with the skills funding that we'd put aside. The discussion now is about the business support side of it. Joe's been working very hard with partners across the patch, with not least with the growth hubs, to really get to a suggestion and an answer and a way of working that I think will have a real impact. So I'll say no more than that, and I'll hand over to Joe.
Thank you, Adam. I'm just going to share my screen and take you through a short presentation. Amy, it appears I can't share my screen.
Sorry, bear with me 2 seconds, Joe. You should. That should be fine now, Joe.
No, it doesn't appear to be working as yet.
Apologies.
Verbally.
If you can try now, Joe. There we go.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Amy.
Sorry for that.
Can everybody see my screen? Is that visible?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, thanks, Joe.
So thank you, Adam. As Adam says, back in June of this year, the board approved the repurposing of £2.4 million of Growing Places Fund for this business support fund, which we wanted specifically to help businesses, SMEs, let's be explicit, who are directly impacted by the effects of COVID-19. So what we are seeking today is the board's agreement on the proposals for the focus areas of this fund and the process and criteria that will sit behind its deployment. And we're also asking the board to note that will also require accountability board approval later this month, subject to today's approval, on the procurement approach, value for money and delegation of decision making. So what we're proposing for this fund is 3 specific target areas where we will support, where we will deploy the fund. These are to support the visitor economy, pre-starts and startups, and business digitisation. We're also proposing that we procure independent service providers for each of these 3 programmes through a series of open call tenders, and that we apply some generic eligibility criteria to each of those procurements that will be applicable across all 3 programmes. So to identify the areas of focus, we've looked at the results of the business surveys that CELEP has carried out. We've looked at our Growth Hub engagement work. We've consulted with Growth Hubs in our wider business support network, and we've also looked at the current business support landscape. And the headline numbers that underpin the deployment of this money are that from the respondents to our business surveys shows that 98% of businesses have been affected by the pandemic. They're all facing numerous issues, but those that have risen clearly to the top are lack of cash flow, reduced access to customers, supply chain issues and availability of staff. And the figure we're looking at is that 40% of those businesses are either temporarily or indefinitely closed. They do have access, all our SMEs do, to a wide variety of live business support schemes. The current landscape is very busy and very complicated. A snapshot taken when we did the analysis of what's currently available to our businesses shows that we've currently got 56 live schemes across the CELEP region. These are national, LEP-wide and area level schemes, not even including district and borough level schemes. And they provide interventions typically such as grants, loans, support and advice, usually a combination of more than one of these. And a number of these schemes are topic or sector specific. So the way that this operates is that each scheme acts as a potential stepping stone for each of our businesses on their own journey to survival, recovery, ultimately success and growth again. And this journey is facilitated by the signposting and the advice from our growth hubs. So what the Business Support Fund will do is it will provide further stepping stones in our business's specific customer journey, acting as a catalyst for further change by supporting businesses specifically to adapt and to innovate in the current climate that the pandemic presents, in order that they can survive the current time and start to recover. So the key areas of focus that we're proposing, I'll go through each one in turn, is the first one is to provide a programme of support for the visitor economy. We know that the visitor economy has been profoundly impacted by the virus. 70% of our furloughed workers across the region operate in these sectors. We know what they are: hospitality, leisure, creative culture. And the primary impact is just down to social distancing, reducing footfall, consumer confidence and spend. Footfall fell astonishingly by 90% in April and May. And many of our small businesses are either still remain closed, or they're trying to navigate the social distancing constraints that still we see continue to be in flux as we face a second wave. So they really are among some of the hardest hit and will be the last to return. And there is a notable gap in our current landscape for the support for these visitor economy businesses. What they need, considering the fact that they have lost their summer season on which many rely, they need help to remodel and reinvent themselves over the winter period, to keep their doors open, whether they be real doors or virtual doors, so that they can position themselves on some kind of recovery footing for next year's season. So what we're proposing for this programme is just over £1 million of the fund to provide 2 successive business support elements. That's one will run after the other. The first is a winter resilience grant scheme. So grants are between £1,000 and £3,000 to businesses in the visitor economy to help them survive the winter, to remodel or redesign themselves in some way. And then the second component is to support and deliver an initiative which will bring organisations and businesses together to re-curate their tourism offer and run alongside that campaigns to start to increase footfall again and reboot the visitor economy in a place-based way. The second area of focus that we are proposing is to support startups and pre-starts. We all are aware of the stark unemployment statistics. Universal credit claims now stand at around 165,000. They've doubled since March. Over a third of our workforce in the Select region has been furloughed, and on top of that we have claims 193,000 for the self-employment support scheme. So we know the situation with unemployment. We know the imminent end of the furlough will no doubt increase those numbers. And we also know that in situations like these, entrepreneurs turn to self-employment and we start to see the creation of new businesses. We also know that many startups tend to fail within their first 18 months without adequate support. So what this programme is proposing to provide is dedicated expert advice and guidance to these new pre-starts and startups on a variety of topics: business models and structuring, financial and business planning, identifying customer needs and meeting of those needs. These are the kind of specialist points of guidance that new businesses need to help them be successful. So we're proposing to allocate £565,000 of the fund to run programmes of support for cohorts of pre-starts and startups. And this programme will have 2 components that will run in parallel with each other. The first is the provision of one-to-one and one-to-many learning, advice and mentoring sessions in a time-bound way, and to accompany that a small startup grant of between 500 and 2,000 springboard grants for those businesses moving through the programme to cover immediate cost barriers. And we expect that this is the kind of programme that will help to start close the gap between skill support and unemployment and business support and bringing people back into employment. The third programme we're proposing is to support the digitisation of businesses. this is key. It's been there for a long time. COVID has just accelerated this need for businesses to digitize and change the way in which they operate. The responses to our business surveys shows us that 50% of our businesses are changing their operations or their models. 41% require new digital infrastructure and technology. So we know that businesses need specialist advice and support to develop new ways of operating, and they also need some help to purchase new equipment to do this. So what we're proposing here is to allocate £750,000 of the fund to deliver this programme, which again would comprise 2 packages running concurrently. Again, one-to-one and one-to-many advice to businesses who are looking to digitise but don't know how to. These will be aspects around online presence and marketing, rebuilding supply chains, implementing hybrid business models, and using technology to accommodate social distancing measures and bring in the ability for businesses to accommodate flexible working and working from home. 48% of our businesses surveyed said that they are now home working, so that's nearly half of those need help in this area. So the programme proposed will provide that in-depth support and advice, and it will also make available on referral small grants to those businesses to purchase the hardware or software that they might need to implement some of those changes. It's worth noting that this is aligned and should be aligned with the Digital Skills for All provision that is being proposed for our Skills Fund. So that's about upskilling people, and running in parallel will be the digitising business component, which is about digitising the businesses that employ those people being upskilled. So this table just shows a summary of what I've just outlined here, but does show a quick breakdown, or a breakdown of those overall allocations towards the support element of the programmes and the grant element of the programmes. And it also shows an indicative timeline for delivery. It's important that we stagger these programmes so if we don't overload what is an already busy marketplace and the work that the growth hubs are doing to facilitate the businesses through that marketplace. We also need to target these programmes at a time when we anticipate the period of demand by businesses for each of these. And we also have limited resource within the team to go through the process of procuring the service providers that we need to do to get these schemes up and running. But we will be looking to procure under a single framework with 3 separate lots, one for each programme. We would want to establish tender evaluation panels alongside that procurement process to assess all the bids, and to do so in a time frame which enables us to start delivery of the first programme from December onwards. You'll also see from this table that we're proposing to allocate £35,000 of this fund alongside the same amount from the COVID Skills Fund to recruit a contract manager who will oversee all of the contracts that both this fund and the Skills Fund go out to procurement for. So alongside that procurement, we're outlining a number of eligibility criteria which will apply to all 3 programmes. This list is certainly not exhaustive, but it highlights some of the criteria we're proposing, and that is that each of the 3 programmes should deliver Pan-LEP and be proportionate across the geography. We'd expect to see no duplication in the proposals of existing schemes or forthcoming business support schemes that we know are coming through the pipeline and just haven't landed yet. So this is about providing additionality and filling the gaps that we can see in the analysis of the current landscape. No match funding will be required for the delivery of these programmes. We know this is a limiting factor. And we would also welcome submissions to tender on behalf of a consortium, because we also know that a consortium enables the bringing together of local advice, local expertise and local knowledge of business networks which is essential in the success of the rollout of programs such as these. And we would also expect to see delivery aligning with the Growth Hub service so that can facilitate the businesses, again, through these programs and other schemes. And we would welcome bidders to demonstrate how or whether they can support or even subsidise the Growth Hub resource in some way. The full list of eligibility criteria that we're proposing is in the paper included in the board pack. And what that takes us to is next steps, which are our seeking of the board's agreement on these proposals today, approval on the procurement approach we're proposing to take, consideration of value for money of the fund, and delegation of decision making on the award of contracts for delivery to the CELEP CEO, and that will be sought at Accountability Board on the 16th of October, subject to today's approval. And then once these steps have been secured, we will look to initiate procurement as soon as possible, the formation of tender evaluation panels, and as I say, going out to contract in time to enable delivery from December this year onwards. So that concludes my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Joe. I know that Perry would like to, has got his hand raised. So Perry, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. And Joe, thanks for the presentation. I think it goes without saying, and I think we've said this before with some of the allocation of money, that this is a relatively small amount for the need out there. So I think that goes without saying. There's two things that strike me with this. One is the importance of the Growth Hub here, and what allocation are we going to make to the Growth Hub? We've gone from Growth Hubs being almost immediate with their answer now to being a number of weeks in delay, and the demand is very much here now. So I'd perhaps like to look at this a little bit more, and also the timing of everything. It goes without saying again, the need is now, and how fast can we make this happen, and what can we as a board do to assist Joe in making the rest of the team making that happen? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks so much, Perry. Adam and Joe, would you like to comment on Perry's observations, questions?
Yes, happy to, Chris.
Thanks, Joe.
We recognise absolutely the enormous upsurge in engagement with the Growth Hubs. It's huge since the pandemic hit. So the resources that the Growth Hub has and the area Growth Hubs have are absolutely key. We've been doing a lot of work alongside the development of these funds with BEIS, who are also looking at the need for further core funding for Growth Hubs, and they're putting together a proposal for Treasury to increase that core funding for next year. And that's the funding source which will enable the increase of business navigators and advisors within the Growth Hub service to enable that efficient interaction and interface with businesses. But what we have been able to do as part of this fund, because as you quite rightly say, it doesn't go very far, is to make the suggestion through the eligibility criteria that in the design of the programmes, how can that pressure on the Growth Hubs be removed by how can the pressure introduced by more schemes coming online, which means the Growth Hubs have to be familiar with them, they have to know about them, and they have to be able to make those referrals. How can that be alleviated by resource allocated and offered within each of the three programmes? So, for example, the business advisors that are available through the three programmes, picking up those conversations with businesses almost immediately. So that's something that we can at least try and incorporate into this delivery.
Okay, thank you. I've got, just so everyone knows, the order that I'm going to call people in, the order they raise their hands, at least came through to me, was first Karen, then Ron, then Anna, Angela, and then Rodney. So Karen.
Thanks, Chris. I've only just worked out how to raise a hand on the thing, so sorry I was waving on the screen. So just two quick things. Again, I think recognising what everybody said, but I do think it's great to see something that's targeted and focused, and particularly about the winter period. I was just wanting to, and again, some of this came up at an employment task force we were at yesterday. There's a huge amount of, and you've flagged it already, lots of noise around in terms of support. So how are we going to be able to really, in a way, very quickly get this onto the agenda of businesses who need the support, who are often the smaller ones who don't necessarily have all the networks? So that's the first. I know you've addressed it, but wanted to flag it. And then second, how do we track any impact of this? I suppose one of the things I'm interested in is what actually works. And what, just so that we can do more of that, rather than actually we've got a plethora of stuff out there. What really works, we should put our time, attention and resource onto that. Don't expect necessarily any immediate answers, but just wanted to flag those two queries.
Thanks, Karen. I mean, are there any immediate reactions do you have to that, Joe, or do you want to come back to that later take it up separately with Karen?
Well, I do. If I may come
Yeah,
back
sure.
on those. Thank you, Karen. These are really key points. So in terms of launching, if you like, the new programs in a really successful way, we can learn from the way in which our ERDF projects do that, and how they do that, how they target the right business networks and make the availability of these schemes, get them out there to the right type of businesses that they're designed for. So for example, the visitor economy scheme, the programme, this is hot on the heels and is actually taking the learning from and the need for more support for the visitor economy from the recently launched ERDF funded 100% grant scheme for the visitor economy and the wider economy, which was oversubscribed before it was even launched. So we know that the demand is out there, there's no question about it. And what that scheme has done is to work very much with destination management organisations across the LEP area to tap into those business networks very, very quickly, which was obviously successful, and also just the awareness of the promotion of the availability of that scheme generally through the Growth Hub network and the Business Support Network, because of the oversubscription that it saw pretty much straight away. So you're absolutely right, we need to tap into the right networks, and that's about preparing to do that as we go through the steps to make the procurement and get the schemes up and running.
Okay, thank you. And we'll follow up directly with you, Karen, anyway, just to make sure you're happy with what we're doing. So just so everyone knows who's called in what order, I've got Ron, then Anna, Angela, Rodney, Sarah, and Nadine. So Ron.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm just thinking out here in terms of some of the timing of support seems to be going through until about February. Is that leaving it a bit late? Because some of that support won't get there till sort of April, May time. When we come to sort of supporting these pre-starts and startups, could we link some of that into our no use empty program? Because some of these startups will need premises, and I just wonder whether we can link in together with some of that funding so we can help these people move into sort of premises that might be empty, so that their businesses can get a good start. And really, I think, as Perry mentioned, the growth hubs, maybe we need to give some more support to the growth hubs to make sure this carries on in the way we want it to carry on.
Yeah,
thank you, Chair.
Yeah, indeed. Joe, any quick observations or comments on Ron's questions?
Recognise the timeline, it is challenging. Some of the timing has been designed around the needs that we anticipate for the visitor economy, and also our ability internally to go out to procurement and the internal resource we have to make that happen. But the sooner we can do that, the better, clearly.
Okay. Thank you. In that case, I'll move on to, I've got Anna, Angela, Rodney, Sarah, and Adine. So Anna Christie.
Hi, Chair. It was really just to reiterate what Ron has just said, and also I know Joe's just responded, but Team East Sussex colleagues were concerned as well about the tourism aspects, and if the funding's not coming out till February, that is really going to possibly be too late for a lot of businesses. I think if you look at what you mentioned on the business survey, in terms of like lack of cash flow, lack of customers and access to staff, for another 5 months, you know, it's just going to be even worse. There will be businesses that will suffer or close down. So I think it's the timing of it, and if anything can be done to bring that forward, I think that's going to be crucial.
Yes, good points. Good points, Anna. Could I just remind everybody to go on mute? I'm getting a little bit of feedback, so if you're not speaking or responding, if you could go on mute, that will make things clearer for everybody. So thank you, Anna. Angela.
Just a minor point, really, and that is, can you in the tender documents, particularly around digitisation and businesses going online, there is a huge increase in cyber attacks, and that some now people are working from home, the lack of security that people have got, and that's just because they have no knowledge of what they should have in place.
Yep.
And if we've got more businesses going online, there's far more risk. I mean, I know colleges and universities are being targeted relentlessly for all sorts of things, for ransomware and all sorts. And I'm just thinking, maybe you should build something into the procurement process to make sure that people are referred to someone, or if there is advice on that being provided.
That's a very good point, Angela. I remember at the student loans company, we got cyber attacked every single day from all over the place. It was just extraordinary. So that's a very good point. I've got Rodney, Sarah, and Nadine. So Rodney, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I just want to welcome this initiative, but speed, I think, is the essence of getting this out there, because any delay could mean that some of those businesses that contribute, particularly I have in mind the visitor economy, may not be there in order to receive this support. How long can they survive? And from a Medway perspective, the visitor economy contributes 350 million to the Medway economy. So I just want to emphasize just how important it is to keep these businesses at least alive until hopefully we see an upturn. But speed is of the essence, and I agree with Ron that you know, February is too late in some instances.
Yes, we'll have to do. I mean, this need for speed and urgency is so important. But you're making a very good point. Thank you, Sarah.
Just to echo what everybody has said, I mean, the challenge is always to ensure that we also follow due process, and as chair of the Accountability Board, I've got to be mindful of that. I noted in the BBC coverage recently, there was a whole load of coverage about companies who claimed money. Organised crime set up a whole series of companies that were claiming money. So we do have to be really careful about that. But I absolutely echo everything everybody has said about getting the money out of there, out to the businesses that need it. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that were also said. Karen said about the evaluation and ensuring that we are analysing the data and evaluating whether we get the right things out to the right people and what impact it has. I think that's really, really crucial. And I know Joe and I have already spoken about that. And then just, sorry, on a really prosaic matter, on the next steps on page 8, on 6.1, it says the Accountability Board on the 18th of October. It's the 16th of October, just to note that.
Thank you. Thank you. Those are all good points. Thank you, noted, Sarah. Adine, last but not least. I think you're on mute, Adine.
Sorry, beg your pardon.
Okay.
Just 2 points, just very much along the same lines. I do think we do need to seriously consider how we make ourselves more agile in the whole procurement process. How do we get that out, and what do we need to do to make that happen?
Sure, absolutely.
Of businesses, because it's all about survival right now. Also, just another point around measures of success. Given the previous AGM, I just hope that we are considering diversity and inclusion within all of that to ensure that we actually can track and monitor our impact alongside that.
Excellent points. Thank you, Adine. Okay, I think if that's all, I want to move to do 2 things. First, can I have your agreement that the focus process and about the focus process and criteria for this 2.4 million business support fund, recognizing the very important points people have made about urgency and metrics and measurement. So can I have your agreement to that? I think I'm seeing nods. Thank you. Yes. Okay. Thank you. And then finally, to note that the Accountability Board on the right date will be required to approve, firstly, the proposed procurement approach, secondly, the award of funding with consideration of value for money, And finally, the delegation of decision-making to CELEP's CEO in respect to the delivery of the programme, including the award of contracts within the 2.4 million COVID Business Support Fund. Okay, all noted.
Sorry,
yes,
Chris, we just need people to vote if they can.
Oh yes, to vote. Clive, did you have your hand up, or were you agreeing? Okay, I think he was.
Yeah,
agreeing.
I was agreeing.
Okay, thank you, Clive.
Sorry.
So no, that's fine. Okay, can we vote on that then? To I think hands is fine if it looks like it's fairly widespread, which it is. So that's fine. Thank you very much. I think we will record that was unanimous. Thank you. Okay, so now we'll move on to the more meatier aspects. Not that wasn't of the meeting, and in particular the local growth fund spend beyond the growth deal. So I'm going to hand over to Rhiannon to take the board through the paper, which seeks to extend the delivery of projects in our growth deal beyond the March 21 deadline. Rhiannon.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the first of two papers I'm going to cover this morning, or this afternoon even, into this afternoon. The first one is focused on high-risk projects, particularly in relation to the local growth fund funding stream. So as a reminder to the board, the programme is due to complete at the end of this financial year, so 31st March 2021. There is still included in the programme a number of high-risk projects, and the focus of this paper is to look at those and to consider whether we maintain support for those projects, or actually in the next item we'll be covering how we actually might want to look at reallocating some of that funding. The board has provided a commitment to central government that all LGF will be committed by the end of this financial year, and that is still really important, and there'll be a severe reputational risk if we're not able to meet that commitment. In the high-risk projects themselves, there'll be a real focus on those at the Accountability Board, both in November and actually the upcoming October meeting as well. But really it's an opportunity at the moment for projects to declare where they are not able to proceed, so we can look at reallocating that funding. And that's just so important that we're able to declare that position as soon as possible, so we can reallocate that funding to projects that can proceed, and we can meet that that commitment that we gave to government around spending and progressing with these projects in this financial year. The board, however, has agreed that there is some flexibility to spend beyond the 31st of March, and actually the board had previously agreed a 6-month extension to the 30th of September 2021, and any projects going beyond that timescale, they need confirmation from this board that we're happy to continue to support those projects. Our recommendation is those projects should only be supported where there's strong assurances around the future delivery of those projects, because ultimately to ensure we can provide that commitment to government around spend during this financial year, we'll be making advance payments to those projects, and therefore we really need to be really careful that those projects can definitely proceed and we're able to meet that commitment back to government. As part of this report, there are 5 projects which are looking to spend beyond the 30th of September 2021. The board has previously agreed to a few others, the likes of Beaulieu Park and A127 Fair Glen project. There's 5 being considered as part of the decision today. 3 of those projects are packages of interventions within East Sussex. These are kind of generally more complex projects where there's a number of interventions being delivered within a specific programme. I think some of the projects within that programme have been delayed due to COVID. Things like going out to public consultation, obviously that's presented challenges, and the local authorities had to revisit how they're going through some of these processes. But really, I think perhaps the programme was slightly ambitious for some of these projects already. However, we're not highlighting any RAG issues in relation to those 3 East Sussex projects. There's 2 others as well, A28 Storey Link Road, and this is one that's faced planning issues. The LGF has been used to provide part of the contribution, but there's also contributions coming from the private sector. And we're waiting for the planning consent to be approved for those developments that are due to be financially contributing to the project. The Accountability Board has agreed a deadline of November for those planning consents to be in place. I think there is some positive news around that. It does look likely that they will be able to proceed, but we are again looking for that confirmation that the planning is there, and also those match contributions are in place before we transfer the funding at the end of this financial year. The final fifth project we're considering is the Innovation Park Medway. This was considered by the board back in January, and the board asked for a further update to be received kind of in due course. The issue here is in relation to the planning consent. So development consent order is required to progress with the project. And there have been delays in receiving that consent due to discussions with High Risk England around the impact of the project on the network. I think there's been some quite positive conversations in relation to the mitigation that's required, and the development consent order is now due to be considered by Medway Council in December of this year. But again, we're really looking for that confirmation that the planning issues are really resolved there, so that the project can progress. And again, we can make that advance payment to Medway Council in relation to the project at the end of this financial year. I think that was everything I was going to say, Chris, so I'm happy to take any comments or questions.
You're on mute, Chris.
Excuse me. Ron, I can see you've got a question.
Yeah, I just saw Sarah smiling there, Chris. I think she enjoyed that. Telling you were muted. I understand everything on this and the delays, etc. We've got a good reputation in our LEP of achievements, and really, I'm putting it back to you, Chair, that we all support one another. And I think over the since I've come back on board, the difference in that support, understanding where our partnership is, and we are working together, but we cannot lose our reputation as somewhere where we actually deliver our projects. So, and I understand, I'm sure every single person will come and say, we're going to achieve this. But I think, Chris, you have to make that final decision as chair, probably with Sarah, that we're not going to lose our reputational risk, and we have to be bold and be honest with ourselves that these will go through, and therefore we sustain our reputation as a good LEP.
Yeah. That's an excellent challenge, Ron. You're right about that. We have the reason that I believe that we've been successful. Indeed, the latest success was securing that amount of the Getting Building Fund, for example, was because of the reputation that you were talking about. We do get things done on time, and I am particularly conscious that we make sure we do that. I think that it's a good challenge to Sarah and myself to make sure that we sit on top of this. And I think that probably at the accountability board, I probably ought to attend as an observer along with, which of course Sarah chairs, so both of us can be satisfied that we're meeting your challenge. So that's I do accept that, Ron. That's a very good point. Rod, that's okay, Sarah? Make sure we do that. Thank you. Roger, I know you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chris. And picking up obviously on A28 and Sturry Link Road or Relief Road, I think this is one which we did discuss at Accountability Board. Yep. Coming back to Ron's point, I think the confidence we can have on this, and Rhiannon mentioned it, is increasing. There have been a range of issues around the requirements of the Environment Agency, which appear now to be pretty much addressed. It was due to come to Canterbury. It has to go through two planning committees, or related applications have to go through two planning committees. So one, the related housing applications through Canterbury City Council, and then this itself through KCC's own planning committee. And we have a schedule for that. The Canterbury meeting was due to be actually just a few days ago at the end of the month. It's now been deferred by a couple of weeks because of, I think, some arrangements about remote meetings. But that said, it is, we had assurances at the Accountability Board from Canterbury City Council's planning officer that this was in hand and was unlikely to encounter problems. And immediately after that, and it still fits in terms of the schedule, there is KCC's own planning committee. So a great deal has been done to keep this on track. And it would seem to me perverse and very unfortunate to be shying at what would hopefully be the final fence. And I think we've known for some time that this was a project which was going to have some challenges on timing. But if anything, I think many of the challenges have now been overcome or are very close to being so.
Okay, that's helpful, Roger. Thank you for that further information. Rodney, I know you had your hand up. Rodney?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I just want to make a comment about Innovation Park Medway. We would have been well underway on this project if it wasn't for what I consider to be the late intervention of Highways England. Not only the late intervention, but once they had intervened, it was to get Highways England to come to the table to do a discussion as to what mitigation was necessary to meet their objections. And I'm pleased to say that Medway Council has identified a mitigation amount, which I'm understanding that has been agreed with Highways England. It could have been agreed a long time ago, you can't plan for the intervention of external bodies such as government departments when you're working out a programme for delivery. However, I'm pleased to say that I think we're nearly there. I'm confident that this will be considered by the planning side of it, will be considered by Medway Council. On top of that, and I expect consent to be granted, we are ready to go and have been ready to go for ages and ages. I would also say that we have now had the intervention of the Secretary of State for Transport on this, and has had a meeting with us because he's heard that we were having difficulties in delivering our proposals on the IPM, and particularly the Rochester Airport side of it. And he is personally very keen to see the retention of local airports. And we've had a face-to-face meeting with him. So I'm sure that will be fed back to his relevant, to Highways England, although it's not necessarily a department of his. I'm sure he will have some influence there as well. So all in all, I am quite confident that we will meet this new timeline that we are now asking. When we talk about reputation of the LEP, of course, were we to lose this funding at this late stage, I'm sure whilst the reputation of the LEP, we tend to consider our reputation with our funding body, which of course is the government, we do have reputation to maintain with the local communities in allowing the local, in this case, Medway Council, to deliver on behalf of the community and the 3,600 job places that are going to be there. And were we to lose this, we would lose that opportunity, and we would, I'm sure the LEP would lose some of its reputation as far as the local community was concerned.
Yes, yes, you're right about that, of course, Rodney. It's a fine line that we have to tread, as always. So thank you for that. Graham.
Yes, just very quickly, listening to the reasons for delays on so many of these projects, it is very often other government departments than those with whom we are directly engaged in terms of the funding process.
Yeah.
Is there any merit in asking the LEP network, when it confers with ministers, to make that point and ask for greater cooperation from other departments? I know not necessarily one government department doesn't necessarily speak to another, but it is clearly such a frustration for people like Rodney and his great sounding project.
No, it's a good point. It's a good point. Well, I'll take this up separately with Mark Livesey and Mark Breton. Thank you for that, Graham. Yes, good point. Okay, and then finally, I think we have Carol Ford. So, Carol.
I just really want to support Rodney with regard to Innovation Park Medway scheme in Rochester. Obviously, the creation of skilled jobs with this development, but more importantly, actually the feed into businesses this is going to create highly skilled jobs in engineering and technology. And as a business that works in, okay, we grow apples and pears, but actually we also engineer because we have to have machinery, robotics, etc. Innovation Park Medway is very important to businesses as well as the local community.
That's an important point, Carol. So thank you for making it. We'll take that into account. So, taking this,
Chris, sorry,
yes.
Liz Gibney has.
Oh, Liz, I didn't see that. Sorry, Liz. Liz, go to you.
Thanks. Just a quick point, Chris, that strikes me that we tend to group the road infrastructure projects together as one entity, whereas some of them are sort of reactive to a problem and some are potentially more proactive in terms of economic growth, particularly in relation to housing. Indeed. I think it's helpful to us to recognise that for going forward. I don't know if that's something to feed in as a
yes, it's a good point. So we should differentiate those. I was looking at Rhiannon here. So we just note Liz's point. That's a good one. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so what I'm just drawing all this together, I'm going to ask you to agree the proposed approach to extending the LGF spend beyond, I've got here September 21, for Eastbourne, Hastings, the Eastbourne and South Wealdon walking and cycling LSTF package, the Hastings and Bexhill movement and access package, the Eastbourne Town Centre LSTF access and improvement package, the A28 Surrey Link Road, and the Innovation Park Medway Phase 2, subject to myself and Sarah satisfying ourselves that all that is being done, but all that could be done is being done to make sure that we are trying to keep our reputation for delivery, recognizing Rodney's point about that we also have to worry, we also have to concern ourselves if we withdraw funding at a late stage. So it's quite a complicated package, but is everyone in agreement with that? Can I have hands to show that? So that puts a bit of burden on Sarah and myself. Sarah is chair of the accountability board and myself feeding into that. Everyone happy? Good. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on in that case to the capital project pipelines. And here, when people are either presenting on this or commenting on this, please could you use the full form of capital funding pots to avoid the confusion between LGF, GBF, and GPF. So, when you want to refer to LGF, that's obviously the Local Growth Fund, the GBF is Getting Building Fund, and the GPF is the Growing Places Fund. If you could try and describe those in full, so that we try and reduce the level of confusion otherwise between these various different funding streams. Rhiannon, over to you again.
Thank you, Chair. So this report does cover all three funding streams, so I'll try and make that quite clear as I go through and provide the information. So firstly, on the Local Growth Fund again, from the previous agenda item, we've identified high-risk projects. Some of those we are expecting them to return the funding into the select pot. So at the next Accountability Board meeting next month, we're expecting the Forum 2 and the Tilbury Riverside project, Thurrock, to return funding back into the LGF pot. This creates a challenge for us as currently we only have one project remaining on the Local Growth Fund programme, pipeline. So the Colchester Garonne space is the next project on the pipeline. Once that project is funded, which it will be through the return of the Local Growth Fund in relation to these projects, we then need to identify how we're then going to invest that funding that's returned. I haven't formally committed to a figure of how much we think that's going to be, but I think based on the return of funding against the Forum 2 and the Tilbury Riverside, I think we're expecting that in itself to be around, once we've taken into account the Colchester project as well, that does need funding, we're expecting about 6.7 million to be available. But that figure could then increase if other high-risk projects then return funding back into the pot. So it's not a huge amount of funding we're talking about, but it could increase over the next few months, particularly at the November and February Accountability Board meetings. The pressures are quite are there around reinvesting that funding. As I said, under the previous agenda item, we have provided that commitment to government that funding will be fully committed by the end of this financial year. So we're really up against it in terms of timescales to be able to reallocate that funding. The recommendation in the report is actually to reallocate the funding to existing LGF projects where there's a genuine case for the need for additional funding. So I think through the impact of COVID, we've seen projects that have increased in cost due to construction risks and increased risk around COVID, whether that's extending delivery timescales or increasing resource costs to deliver these projects. There are also projects where there is a genuine funding gap that's been created perhaps by private sector companies no longer being in a position to come forward and make those contributions in the timescales anticipated. What we really focused on here is where there is a legitimate case of if this additional funding is not awarded, the project will not be able to proceed, or in some cases, again, there could be abortive costs incurred up to £7 million that could be incurred in abortive costs if additional public funding isn't invested in these projects. So the recommendation, is to reallocate LGEF to existing LGEF projects. That makes sense in terms of timescales as well. It means projects have already got business cases that can come forward quickly to the Accountability Board. We can put the legal agreements and the documents in place to then enable the transfer of that funding before the end of this financial year. We are recognising, however, that some of those high-risk projects that were on the list under the previous agenda item, they might not declare their position until the February board meeting next year, which puts us in a very challenging position to reallocate that funding. So as part of this decision report today, we're firstly setting out an option that we reallocate LGEF to existing projects. Where that's not possible, our kind of plan B option to be agreed with the Accountability Board at the very end of this financial year would be to actually swap the Local Growth Fund into the Growing Places Fund pot. So the Growing Places Fund pot, that's a recyclable loan scheme. There's no deadlines around when that's spent. And we do have an existing pipeline of projects that already sits against that fund. Although if sufficient funding goes into that pot, we might want to then identify further projects that could be funded through the Growing Places Fund. So that's just kind of a plan B approach, I suppose. The other thing I want to draw your attention to in this report relates to the Getting Building Fund, so the latest funding pot that we've received from governments. And here, I think we all recognise we worked to extremely tight timescales to be able to identify these projects. I think it's looking good in terms of business cases coming forward. We've received all the business cases and they're currently being assessed and due to come to Accountability Board over the next few months. But we do recognise there could be challenges identified at the last minute in relation to some of these projects. And the extremely fast timescales we work to be able to identify them, and perhaps that due diligence might not have been done for all of the projects in advance. So again, here what we're proposing is actually a grace period up until the last strategic board meeting of this calendar year, in which federated areas could propose to the strategic board any swaps they want to make in relation to that Getting Building Fund and the pipeline of projects that have been identified. So currently we've got 34 projects that are identified. Any changes to that list will need to be agreed by this board, as well as the Accountability Board. We'll also need to agree those changes with central government themselves. They'll want to be aware of any swapping in and out of projects that we want to make. But I think there'll be processes in place that we can make those changes. Once we've made those swaps, I think we've put in a deadline of the end of this calendar year to be able to make those swaps, so we can make sure those projects having those funding awards, the legal agreements have been put in place, and we can quickly get the funding out to be able to start the delivery of these projects. Beyond that, if there are further changes, we'll need to make sure there's a pipeline in place. So again, we can quickly make swaps to projects if there are last minute issues identified. I think that was everything I was going to comment on that, Chris.
Okay, great. I've got a couple of people who want to speak. So David Finch.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to support the recommendation, and obviously there are a number of pipeline projects in Essex that naturally fall into the category to receive any underspent money. So Queen Street, for example, in Colchester, there's obviously a need there to facilitate and help that project. And also the Junction 8 on the M11 as well. So they naturally fall into that category of projects that are without the requisite amount of funding, and the recommendations that are being put forward, I think, are sensible, that we deal with projects that are already in the pipeline but are short of money because of different circumstances to complete, that we should finish those first.
Thank you very much, David. Graham.
It's just to generally support the thrust of this, but to ask that when it comes to topping up existing LGF projects, can we make sure we favour and prioritise those that have got a strong COVID-19 recovery element to them, and don't forget the green recovery bit, which is becoming more and more important to government, and we will get more and more brownie points from them if we tend to favour those sorts of projects. Thank you. But general support.
Thank you, Graham. Those are all the comments I have. Does anyone else got any observations or comments they wish to make? Liz, is that your hand I see up? Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, that's just to agree with Graham that that's my previous point entirely, really, that I think that it's much as the pipeline is really important, we need to identify the projects that unlock other things. That's something I is very, very important.
Thank you, Liz, very much. Okay, and then Ron, you're on mute, Ron.
Still mute.
I've got it.
Yep.
I think I fully support this, and also David's comments about where we can top up existing projects, we ought to, because I think Rhiannon was right. Because of delay, cost pressures have come into some of these projects, and if we've got the funding to help top up these existing ones, then we should do so. And yeah, I support what David has said. Thank you.
Roger, I know your hand's up. Sorry, I missed you before. Roger.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I support this approach as well. And I think actually the logic goes back almost to what Rodney was saying earlier on. There is also the issue of our credibility with the communities we represent in terms of delivering projects. And if the scope is there to do so, and there is good reason, then I think we should. So I'm supportive of that approach as well.
Thank you very much, Roger. So I'm going to move to the recommendations. The first one is that we agree that the Local Growth Fund pipeline should be made up of the current Local Growth Fund projects that now have a funding gap, and the Strategic Board will prioritise those at an additional meeting to be held in December, recognising Liz's points and the other points that have been made here. So can we agree with that? Hands up, I can see those across the screen. I think that's unanimous, thank you. Then secondly, to approve the allocation of any uncommitted local growth fund at the end of 2021 to the Growing Places Fund pot. The value of this fund swap will be considered and approved by the Accountability Board at its last meeting in Q4 2021. Happy with that? Thank you. Thirdly, and finally, to agree a grace period for federated boards to consider their projects and recommend any amendments. This period will end on the 11th of December of this year, 2020. This grace period is pending confirmation from central government that it will be possible, under grant conditions, to make changes to the list of projects to be funded by the Getting Building Fund. Everyone happy with that? Great. Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you. Good. In that case, we'll move on then to the item 6 on the agenda, which is the delivery plan for 2021. And I'm going to ask Suzanne to introduce the delivery plan to the board. Suzanne, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So the delivery plan for 2021, it is a little bit late because we are now in October, so halfway through the year. Obviously, it's absolutely necessary for us to have a plan. We need it for the management of the Secretariat and our resource planning. It's also a requirement of the National Assurance Framework. A full year plan had been drafted in March, but that was a pre-COVID plan. During the sort of immediate crisis periods, we were fairly reactive, like many other organisations, no doubt. We focused on pivoting to a new way of working, assessing the impact of the crisis on our programmes, getting the messaging out to businesses and to partners, which was a huge piece of work over those first few weeks. But now we've had the opportunity to review the plan that we did have in place. And so now we have a plan for the remaining 2 quarters of the year, which I present to you. You will be updated on progress against this plan at each of the normal standard CELEP strategic board meetings, so quarterly. I think that's it. I wasn't planning to go through in any detail of the plan. The other point that I have on this item is around a future principle of operation. It does link to our delivery plan and the way that we work, in agreeing the principle that we will charge admin fees for access to funding streams in future. This isn't something that we've done in CELEP before. It is something that most other LEPs do. At the moment, we're not talking specifics because we do not have any new funding streams. I'm not proposing here that we retrospectively apply it to those funding streams that we have. So if there is a future round of GPF, Growing Places Fund, for example, I'm not proposing that we would charge an admin fee here. It would be for a new fund that came in, and you as a board would be presented with the detail, the principles on how we would charge the admin fee, how the fee is made up, and an assessment of what that fee might have on any take-up of the fund. But as we've presented to board in the past, the pressures on the Secretariat budget are growing. We could also look at using that admin fee to offset some of the pressures that we have in our local authority partners as well, which we know local authorities are under extreme financial pressure at the moment themselves too. For a capital scheme, it should mean that the applicant would be able to include the cost of that in their ask. So we'd have to be very clear about how it works and work with partners. But at the moment, I'm just looking for an agreement in the principle that we will explore that and look to do that in future.
So it's just basically a heads up, and we'll get specifics when and if the new funding streams come for consideration.
Yeah, I think we'd need to take a case-by-case approach, because I think each funding stream would be different. I don't think having a blanket policy would work for us. We'd need to look at each funding stream and see how that works. But as it's quite a change in direction for us, I wanted to give the board the opportunity to have their comments on that proposal.
Okay, thank you. So, any comments or observations for Suzanne and the team? I've got David, it's David Finch and Ron. So Dave and Jeff. So David, Ron, and Jeff.
Madam Chairman, Chris, I'm confused because I think introducing fees, we've talked about the scope possibility. It's additional because of secretariat pressures. We're actually thinking that we need it to support councils. So I can't agree to the principle because you've raised the issue as what the fee might be used for, and therefore I haven't got an idea or a total sum, or indeed a total percent I can agree to. I can agree, if I agree a principle, that means to the specifics of how that principle will be operated. So it's a question as much for you, Chairman, as indeed it is for the officer as well. But
I mean, I have a certain amount.
I say it very light-hearted.
No, David, I have some sort of sympathy with that, as you can probably tell from my initial question to Suzanne. So let's just see what other people think. So Ron, I had you, and then Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think this is a sensible approach, actually, and we've got to remember we are one of the largest LEP. And I think we've got probably the smallest secretariat that operates it, and we have to support our team, and it is a team. And so I think this approach on future funding and how we apply as councils, as organisations to get that funding, and if it means it's a percentage slice of the amount, I'm for that. But the delivery plan, I think how Suzanne has outlined it, I think makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Just a minor point, really. In principle, it all seems to stand up. But going back to what we said earlier about local engagement and local people, when the LEP was set up, we talked about from the bottom up, and within the papers, it talks about everyone that the LEP engages with, but it doesn't actually mention the federated boards. And I think the federated boards are important to the whole structure of what the South East LEP is. So I think just as a minor point, it would be good to
thank you, Joe.
Quite active within it, and I think that follows up also from what Ron is saying about how it's supported through the federated areas.
Yeah,
I'll make sure that's updated.
Thank you. So I've got Anna Christie, Graham Butland, and then Graham Peters. So Anna, to you.
Thank you, Chair. Really, it was just to follow on that point. It's just to ensure given proper consideration by the board. The East Sussex County Council officers have queried whether this principle would also cover the associated administrative costs of federated boards and upper tier authorities. So if that could be given proper consideration, please.
Sure, Anna. That's a good point. We'll take that on board. Graham Butland, and then Graham Peters.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to add my support to David Finch's ideas. I'm not against it, but I think I'd like to see the paper before agreeing in principle. So I'm very happy for the work to be done and then come back to the board. I just think if we put in principle, everybody will assume that we're there without having considered the full details.
No, you're quite right. Graham Peters.
Anna has already raised the point I was going to make.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. What I will say on this is that you may recall a couple of board meetings ago, we asked for a working party to be set up to look at the whole question of finances of the Secretariat and the way that we support things. And I'm not sure that working party has yet reported back to the board. I know they've been working hard on it, but I don't think they've reported back. So what I would suggest is that the working party, who are members of the board, take on board the comments that we have received here today and come back to the next board with a more worked up paper that we can consider this in more detail. Because I also am actually intrinsically uncomfortable with agreeing a principle where we've already asked people to look at it who have been working on it. So if I could ask the working group to take on board the comments that we've had. I mean, we just have to remind ourselves that the traditional way that we've financed ourselves, apart from the grant from central government and the support we have from the local authorities, has also been on interest on the capital sums, and of course, with interest turning negative actually now, that is just not workable anymore. So I think all these things need to be taken in consideration. The other thing, of course, is we have asked central government, both through Catalyst South, through the network, and indeed we've made representations on behalf of the CELAP as well, for central government to look very carefully at the whole question of funding LEPs. There is no question that the burden on LEPs has significantly increased. So, for example, the Getting Building Fund has required significant unbudgeted resourcing for LEPs and indeed for all of us. And central government really cannot expect that the very important administrative work on due diligence and all the rest of it, administration, that's really important work for looking after public money, cannot be done on fresh air. It has to be done. It has to be properly resourced and therefore paid for. Otherwise, we'll run into all sorts of problems. So I think these are bigger questions that do need to be thought about. And what I would suggest is that the working party on financing of the Secretariat and indeed the LEP as a whole come back and report to the next board, and then we can consider this in more detail. If that's okay with people. Okay. Do I have agreement to that? On that particular point? Thank you. On the first point about the delivery plan, can I ask for your approval of the delivery plan as set out by Suzanne? I think that's unanimous, I can see across, so thank you for that. Okay, thank you. In that case, we'll hand over to the next item, which is the Statement of Accounts for 1920. I must say, I'd always thought of myself, possibly wrongly, as rather a sophisticated user of accounts before I entered LEPland, and then I have found the presentation of LEP accounts over the years a matter of some perplexity and complexity for myself, as what I had thought was a reasonably sophisticated user of these things. And I'm very pleased to see that that Lorna and the team have made great efforts to to simplify and make these accounts clearer. So she's done a great, I think she's done a great job in making them clearer. Of course, now this will be the last year we have a partnership accounts. Of course, for next year, we'll be considering limited company accounts. But so thanks to Lorna for making them, at least for me, more easier to understand. And I'll hand over to her to present them. Lorna.
Thanks, Chris, and I'm glad to see that you're finding them in a slightly more straightforward format, and we'll consider the position for next year at a later point, although I don't think it will be very greatly changed as all the money is still continuing to be managed through the accountable body. But anyway, let's talk about the 1920 accounts. Excuse me. Just to remind the board that Essex County Council acts as the accountable body for CELEP, which means that all the CELEP monies are managed by the council on behalf of the LEP and in accordance with the decisions of the Accountability Board. And that position is ongoing under the current arrangements as well. In its role as the accountable body, the County Council is not allowed to use the CELEP funding for its own purposes, so that's why we maintain separate financial records, and separate accounts are prepared, and we are subject to their own external audit. So the accounts that we bring for the year ending 1920 have gone through our audited external audit process. The auditors have confirmed that the accounts have been prepared in accordance with the local authority accounting provisions, and they've not identified any significant findings that need to be brought to the board's attention. Just to briefly make mention of the overall position with regards to the revenue or the operational income, that's exceeded spend. The income exceeded spend by 579,000, which enabled that funding to be transferred into the reserves to support the ongoing operations of the LEP into the current financial year. This meant that at the end of March, the balance of the operational reserves stood at 1.3 million. Just to kind of build on the conversations that happened in the last item, and to reflect on the current reserves position, we've previously discussed at the earlier board meetings earlier this year, back in June and July. Whilst we have got monies currently sitting in our reserves, the reliance historically of the CELEP to fund its operational budgets using the external interest receipts on capital balances held are now at risk. One, because as mentioned, interest rates are now very low and at risk of turning negative, but also because by the end of this financial year, the majority of the capital balances held by Essex on behalf of CELEP are planned to be spent. And although we are expecting some getting building fund monies next year and some balances left in our growing places fund, with interest rates staying low, that's going to put pressure ongoing into 21, 22 and beyond. So the board report sets out the ongoing risk with regards to our reserves balances, and certainly we'll be working or continuing to work very closely with the CELEP Secretariat to look at the budget position for next year and ongoing. If anybody has any questions in relation to that position or in relation to the accounts, I'm happy to take them.
Lorna, thank you very much. I mean, I think it's probably also just worth reflecting that this is the last year that we'll be asked to consider accounts for the partnership, which of course has now been succeeded by CELEP Limited. Just for everyone to be aware, I'm sure you all are, but as directors of a limited company, you will have obligations and responsibilities under the Companies Act for the accounts moving forward, and in particular the levels of reserves and the ability to continue trading on a solvent basis will be things that will be required to be considered going forward. So this is actually what the point that Lorna is making is a very, very important one going forward, and the work that the Working Party on financing, etc., the way that we organise ourselves and finance ourselves going forward is really comes into quite sharp focus as a result of the transformation from a partnership to a limited company organised under the Companies Act. So just an observation. Any other comments or, yeah.
Sorry, Chris, if I could just clarify with respect to that. So
sure,
just to be clear, in the way that you set yourselves up as a company, the decision was that no monies themselves are actually being run through the company, so they continue to be managed by the accountable body. So whilst it is clear and important that we can offer and secure that ongoing sort of trading position, the monies themselves aren't a liability risk of the company themselves.
No, but we do have responsibilities under the Companies Act for making sure that we are able to continue.
Yes.
Which is the point I was making. So that's all. Whereas before, that wasn't so clear.
Oh, it's a slightly different position now, but from the financial position in terms of how the money is being managed, and the money remains the responsibility of the accountable body, and being managed through the decisions being made of the accountability board, as has historically been the case.
Right. Okay. Any other comments or queries?
Perry has his hand up, but I don't know whether that was
Perry.
annulled.
Perry was, sorry, Perry, did you have?
No, left up from before, sorry.
Okay, sorry, excuse me if I missed you out. Anybody else? So all you're being asked to do is note that you have considered, all you have to do is confirm you considered these accounts. Can I have your agreement that you have considered the accounts? Thank you. Okay, let's move on then to the Sector Support Fund. Adam.
Thank you, Chris. So just briefly on the Sector Support Fund application that you have in your packs. It's a topic we've actually already covered today in both conversations I think that we've had. So this is around rebuilding confidence and demand in the visitor economy. And really it's all about helping this important sector recover from COVID-19. I won't rehearse all the points in the paper, other than to just draw out the key ones, I guess. So part of it is around raising destination awareness and supporting sustainable tourism management. Then covers supporting consumer confidence in travelling by public transport. Elements of it are around building positive engagement and confidence among CELEP residents as well. I think the project at large is supported across the federated areas. There is match and matching kind coming from Visit Essex, from Visit Kent, and from Sussex Modern as well, which is quite evident in the paper. So it's broadly supported. We're in a fortunate position of having lots of active partners on this particular agenda, and I think that's strongly reflected in this paper overall. So I would recommend that the board endorse it as written. Just more widely on Sector Support Fund, I think we're expecting the Gourmet Garden Trails, which is seeking 25,000, to resubmit a bid following its late withdrawal. So originally that was in the agenda pack for today, but it was unsuccessful in its bid to Visit England for match funding. So that project's having a bit of a rethink how it pitches. So that'll be coming back. In addition to that, we're expecting a further 3 bids in December for Sector Support Fund, which will total around 600,000. And there is currently around 861,000 in the pot. So just going back to this one specifically, I think it's a strong application, reflective of a sector with some need at the moment. I think it targets exactly the right things to do, and as I said to you before, it's broadly supported across the LEP. I think that was all I really had on it, Chris. You're on mute.
Thank you. Anybody got any comments or observations on the Sector Support Fund presentation that Adam's just gone through? Yeah, Ron.
Well,
and Jeff. So Ron and then Jeff.
Thank you. It's just that, fully support this. I just wonder, as a LEP, and I think Rodney touched base on it a couple of sections ago about our airports. Yep. And I think if we can put some pressure on the Secretary of State's around, because we've got Stansted, we've got Southend, we've got the Medway. We've got these regional airports that are struggling because of lack of with the COVID and the lack of travel. And I think whatever we can do, and whatever pressure we can put on the government to try to financially support these regional airports, the better it will be.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, in fact, although Gatwick is just outside our area, the Gatwick slowdown has an effect on the western part of our area. No question about that. So that's a point well made, Ron. Thank you. Jeff, I had you down. You're on mute, Jeff.
Just to say, there are two buttons in here, and I pressed one and the other one went off, so sorry.
You're a TV director by profession.
I know, that's why it's always embarrassing. Thank you so much, Chris. I have a man who can, that's the usual way. Just to say, from the KMET perspective, that it was very much supportive, but again, asking to get the support to those in need as quickly as possible, because of the 2021 season will be here very soon, and if we don't work ahead of that, help them ahead of that, it may be too late. So,
sure. Thank you very much. Any other points or questions on this? No. Okay. So what we're going to ask to do is endorse the Rebuilding Confidence and Demand in the Visitor Economy project, which has been assessed as meeting the sector support eligibility criteria for funding, subject to confirmation and endorsement from the sponsoring CELEP Federated Board. Are we happy with that? Great. Okay, thank you. In that case, we'll move on to governance and policy decisions. Suzanne, there are three matters I think that you want to take us through.
Yes, there are. Thank you, Chris. These aren't major changes to our governance, which I'm sure those who've been with the CELEP for a while will be very pleased to hear that. We have some small changes we've made to the assurance framework to include the Getting Building Fund in there. We had assumed that a fund wouldn't be launched mid-year in the past, and we were wrong. So we've updated for the GBF programme, and we've also future-proofed that, so we've made it generic, so that if we do have some short timeline funding come out in future, we have a process and an ability to be able to get it out. We've also used the opportunity to tidy up a few points and update where necessary. There is a table in the report that details the changes that we've made. It is a requirement of the CELEP Framework Agreement that these changes are consulted on with the members of the Accountability Board, and we did that at the last Accountability Board meeting, and there was no significant feedback on the changes proposed. So that is all I have to say on the assurance framework. Another requirement under the framework agreement is that CELEP Limited is a party to legal agreements in future, so along with the accountable body and the funding party, whoever that may be. As board is aware, we need to move very quickly on the growing and the Getting Building Fund. We need to spend by the end of financial year 21-22. So we're asking in advance for agreement from the board that the decision for CELEP Limited to be party to those GBF agreements be delegated to Adam and I. The final point we have is a requirement of the National Assurance Framework that we have a small medium enterprise business champion, board member, to act as that champion. Chris has acted as the champion in the past. In January, it must have been now, we asked for expressions of interest from board members to take on that role. Given the crisis, we've not had a chance to come back to you before, but now coming back now, we had two members of board express an interest. Clive Soper, who is from the FSB, and Anna Christie from Sussex Chambers of Commerce, have both expressed an interest in the role, and they've also expressed a desire to work jointly. As a state in the report, we think that this is probably a good idea, giving some additional resilience at this time, and also I'm sure Anna and Clive are very, very busy in their day jobs at the moment. Both have really strong background in supporting small and medium enterprises, and the Secretariat would recommend very strongly that the board appoint them to act in that role. We propose that they're appointed on a 2+2+2 basis as we appoint board members.
Okay, thank you very much, Suzanne. Any comments or observations on that? So we have to do, I think, 3 things. We have to approve the adoption of the Assurance Framework 2020 as set out in Appendix A. Everyone happy with that? Approval, I think we need to, thank you. We have to approve the inclusion of CELEP Limited as a party in the future GBF funding agreements, and final approval delegated to the CEO and COO. Everyone happy with that? Thank you. And then finally, we have to formally appoint Anna and Clive as the CELEP SME business champions. Everyone happy with that? Okay, thank you. So I mentioned at the outset that I thought we should do we should consider when to do an initial governance health check, as I call it, on how we think under the new arrangements since the 1st of April this year under the new limited company. There are, as I mentioned earlier, there are certain legal requirements that we have to observe as directors of a limited company, slightly higher, more formal obligations. So what I would, and I think I'm going to discuss with Adam and with Sarah how best we do this and when the right time to do it is. I think since we've only been going a limited period, if we are going to do a governance health check, it should be very, very light touch. It might mean a questionnaire to you as to how you think the board is operating and what suggestions you might make as to how we can, if we need to recalibrate things, how we can do things better, what we could improve. So it will be just a light touch. If we do it, it will be a light touch survey. So I just wanted to let you know my thoughts on this. If we are going to do it, it might be a good idea to do this before the formal assessment that we have with the Citizen Local Growth Unit, which usually takes place in January of the new year, to say that we've done it and that we're thinking hard about how we operate most effectively. Or alternatively, we could not do it and wait until the new year. So it's something that I think Sarah, Adam, and I and Suzanne need to just discuss how to do this, and if we're doing it. But I just thought I'd give you a heads up that we're thinking about it, and we'll come back to you on that. Just to make sure I've got a couple of comments on the chat. That's fine. Okay. Great. Thanks, everyone. So any other comments or queries on that particular item?
I think Karen has her hand up.
So Karen, yes. Excuse me, Karen.
Yeah, I'd really support it. I think something like touch, but if we can demonstrate that we're, on the front foot, looking at this, being really proactive about it, I think that'll all help in the January piece. But just really light touch.
Thanks. Exactly. Just a small survey, something like that, which we could do just for you to complete in 10 minutes or so. Good. Okay. Fine. Thank you very much for that, Karen. So that's supportive of what I'm thinking of doing, which is great. Just on any other business and close, I just wanted to remark on the fact that on Monday of this week, I was traveling in my car listening to the radio, and as you sometimes the radio comes through, you get traffic reports coming through, and there happened to be as I was listening to, I don't know, whatever it was, Radio 3 or Radio 4, this is usually my usual choice of station, and suddenly Radio Kent came on, and it was a news flash, a traffic flash. And they said, "Oh, we're about to hear from Roger Gough for an interview with Roger." So I could not resist listening for an hour of Roger. So I was in a traffic round. I have to say, Roger, I was extremely impressed. I thought you gave an extremely polished performance. But the one thing you did mention, and it's something that hasn't actually come up on at this board meeting at all today, and that is that obviously we're leaving the European Union at the end of well, we have left the European Union. The transition phase comes to an end in 2 months' time, or 2 or 3 months' time. We don't have a deal, and you were talking about some of the dislocation effects of that, and in particular, the imposition of a so-called border between Kent and the rest of the country, and how that's going to operate. And it just seemed to me that we haven't discussed that at this meeting. That the consequences, not just for Kent, but for the whole of our LEP, could possibly be profound. And I just wanted to say to you, Roger, that certainly I want to support you in any way that I think the board should support you in any way that you can, because I feel as a resident of Mid-Kent, sitting as I do 20 miles up the road from Dover and Folkestone, that whenever there's a dislocation in Calais, as there was last week, I think, that, you know, I feel it. I can't move outside my front door because all the traffic that was on the M20 comes past my front door. So, and no, it doesn't come past, it sits outside my front door, not moving. So these are very important issues, not just for me as a resident of Kent or us as residents, but also as business people. And if there's anything we can do in these very important days to lobby government to put forward the case for Kent and Kent business, and indeed for CELEP and CELEP businesses, because it won't just be Kent, it'll be East Sussex and Essex too that will feel the dislocation, not just of traffic, but other things. I think that you know, we only have a very limited time to do it, but if we can help, we'll be helpful and be supportive, we should. So really just a supporting statement to you, Roger, and let us know if there's anything that you think at this late stage we can be doing.
Thank you, Chris. I think there probably are actually a couple of, I'll take this away to colleagues, but there probably are a couple of areas on which it might be that support would be appreciated. And certainly, I think the first thing is we have the plans in place, or we are working to put in place the plans that, as you say, I made reference to in the interview. And because we've been working on these in some senses for several years and honing them and refining them in the light of the current circumstances, you know, they are quite well developed. But there are still significant elements where we work with government where, although there's been a big step up in action in recent months, where clarification is still needed. And there may well be points on that in which CELEP's voice in support of ours would be helpful. So I will certainly take that away. I think there are also some interesting questions as to what the implications are. You know, as has been reported, the plans that have been set are for coping with 7,000 HGVs within Kent, and you know, they are clear, and I think they are quite credible. How things work out if the congestion increases beyond that is, I think, an interesting question as well, and has implications certainly for us and probably for much of the rest of the region as well. So I will take those couple of points away, and I'm sure any support that CELEP is able to give and in putting over a credible message on this would be very helpful.
Thank you, Roger. Well, please do. And so I've got a couple of people who want to comment. So I've got Anna, Graham, Perry, and then Ron. So Anna, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, there definitely needs to be greater awareness of what's going to change and what's going to happen, because it will impact every single business, not just those that import and export. Yeah. So recently, literally a week ago, the British Chambers presented government with a list of 26 unanswered questions that affect everything from trade, regulation, labelling, CE marking, borders, customs, tariffs. So I have put a link in the chat.
Yes, I see that, thank you.
Anything, this is where we need local MPs and CELEP to really help us push this so that we can get these unanswered questions answered.
Yeah. Okay, again, Anna, if you could work with with Adam and Suzanne and the team on those, we'll make sure that we lend our voices to help you on those questions. I've got Graham, Perry, and then Ron. So Graham.
Yes, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Very much building on your point, and thank you for Roger's response. I just wonder whether we should consider penciling in a tentative diary date in case we need to have a meeting on the subject, because it could be so big and so critical.
It is.
And it's quite hard to get this lot together.
It is.
Sorry, this lot, how rude. This board together in a hurry, and I think it'd be useful to have place markers, which everybody's delighted when you cancel a meeting. It's a pain to try to bring one together.
Yes, no, I think that's a good point, Graham. So I'll leave that with the Secretariat. I've got Perry, Ron, and then Roger. So Perry.
No, just to offer in my position as Deputy Chair of the Port of Dover.
Indeed.
Any help that Roger might well need, and indeed happy to bring any of the senior colleagues along to present to the CELEP at any stage in the future in view of the importance of this.
I think that would be very timely, Perry. I mean, I think it's so critical to a dislocation that's in your area affects us all. quite apart from the effect on the UK PLC of slowdowns in the trade across the short straits. So I've got Ron and then Roger. So thank you for that. I think that's something we should take up. And again, I'll leave that with the Secretariat to work out with you how best to do that. So Ron and then Roger.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think absolutely right on what Roger said, and Perry and yourself. I think just the fear going into Kent will have a major impact on people visiting and its businesses and its visitor numbers, destinations. We just talked about visitor destinations, etc. And I think whatever we can do, we should work together and give that help that's required.
Thank you. Okay, there's a pretty strong mandate there from the board. Roger, the final word, I think, to you.
Yeah, no, thank you all for what you said on that. Just 2 quick points. One is in response to Perry's comment. I think that's very helpful. Thank you. Clearly, we work very closely with the port, and that's a central part of the work done, particularly through sort of Kent Resilience Forum. But no, I think that would be very helpful. And just a comment which I made in the course of the interview, and which perhaps worth reiterating. We talk, and a lot of the media talk is about deal or no deal, and clearly that matters. But actually, whatever happens, there is a significant change that's taking place here. In many ways, the big difference in terms of paperwork requirements, matters needed at the border and so on, comes from our leaving the single market, which is clearly going to happen. And indeed, I heard a senior government representative say that 80% of the work that traders and hauliers would need to do in the event of no deal, they would in any case have to do in the event of the best possible deal.
That's
so
right.
it's a reality that's coming whichever way.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I think people think it's binary. If if we have some deal, then everything will be fine, and we won't notice the difference. That of course is not the case. Okay, thank you. I want to I'll conclude the meeting there. Actually, I've given you 15 minutes of your day that you might not have otherwise thought you were going to get. So 15 minutes early. So thank you for a very cogent and clear discussions on the points, and thank you for your support. I did particularly want to thank the Secretariat, not only for the papers and the way that we're doing the papers now, which I think is an improvement. I know we've been doing it for a meeting or two, but so thank you for the way the papers have been drawn up. Thank you to Lorna for making the accounts certainly to me, more intelligible. So thank you to her. And also thank you to the Secretariat for what I thought was a very good and slick AGM this morning. Clearly, there was a lot of work that went into that, and I think we had a very good session on some important topics. So thank you to Adam, Suzanne, Rhiannon, and the rest of the team for that, and thank you as always for making the board go efficiently and effectively. So thank you to you for that on behalf of the board. That's it. Thank you much, everybody. 15 minutes you didn't think you were going to have. So there you are.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.